What if I told you it was possible to play this lead without even thinking about scales? And then you learn that you could take these same concepts but apply them to different styles. Okay, so in this video, we're going to go through that first example that I played. Slow, easy to play, nothing technical, so no matter where you are as a player, you'll be able to follow along. If you'd like to watch the second example, which is more of a country vibe, using the same techniques we're going to learn in this video, and then also download the tablature and the MP3 jam tracks for both tracks, so you get all those extra materials so that you can practice everything we're about to talk about. You can get all of that by going to activemelody.com, go to the weekly lessons page, and do a search for EP507. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about before I jump into the specific chord shapes and all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about is the tone that I'm using. I'll be very brief on this. Basically, there's three effects here. Now, I'm not playing through an amplifier. I'm playing through a Kemper profiler. It just makes it easier to record. It's got its own built-in effects, and it's basically an amp modeler. But what I'm doing is I've got a little bit of overdrive. Even though it's soft and pretty, the sound that we're going to be using here, you wouldn't notice it. But there's a little bit of overdrive just to give it a little bit of sustain. By a little, I mean very little. There's also some reverb, which is just built into that amp. But then the big sound is the delay. You can hear it. Now, when I say the big sound, the big differentiator, I guess, in that sound. So when you add a little delay like that, your notes can ring a little longer. Now, you don't have to have any of these effects. These are just what I'm using. You could do this on acoustic guitar and it'll sound great. The real value of this lesson isn't trying to emulate that sound. It's just understanding what's going on with these sus chords that we're going to talk about and all of the the theory parts, so that you can basically replicate this. You can get into the effects down the road, but I did want to at least explain what I'm using, so if you want to try and get close to that sound, you can do that on your own with what you have. Okay, so the first thing to talk about then, I guess, is the key of the song. The song is in the key of G, but it doesn't start on the G chord. It actually starts on the 4 chord. So it starts on a C chord, and then it goes to the 1 chord, which is your G. Then it goes to the 5 chord, which is a D, and then it goes to the 6 chord, which is E minor. Those are the 4 chords: C, G, D, E minor. And it just keeps repeating those. Now, some of you are saying, what are these numbers? When you talk about numbers, I always kind of throw this stuff out there. I do have an essential theory course if you want to know what the numbers are when we talk about numbers like this. That course goes through that. There's also a unit in that course called the chord family, which is a great unit, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about in this is covered in that. I don't want to repeat myself too much. But anyway, some of that preliminary stuff that I'm just going to assume is covered in that essential theory course. So as I played this lead, very slow, spaced out, I wasn't thinking about scales. And I just want to throw this out here. This is something I stumbled upon a long time ago. Nobody ever showed me this. But I realized if you're staying in the key of the song, you can play sus4 and sus2 chords, especially in this style of playing where it's real open and spacey and you want notes to ring out for a long time. This is a really good technique for that, and it's actually super simple to see and use. Now, if you don't know what a sus chord is, a sus, S-U-S, maybe you've looked at a chord chart and you've seen sus2 or sus4, like a G sus2. What that means is suspended chord. And a suspended chord is basically a chord that isn't resolved, and it's either going to be a sus2 or a sus4. So here's basically what it is in a nutshell. Your chord, and by the way, everything we're going to be doing is on the top 3 strings. I'm doing that on purpose. I'll explain more as we get into it. But we're going to be looking at this G triad here. This is out of the E shape from the Cage system. Think of your your G chord using the E shape. Just the top 3 strings though, this little triad here. If we take a look at that as our starting point, there's 3 notes in that chord. There's the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the major scale. That's what a major chord is, 1, 3, and the 5. Now, when you're playing them on the guitar, they're not always, well, on any instrument, piano too, but they're not always in that order, 1, 3, and 5. They are when you're explaining it, but when I'm playing this, for example, the bottom note is the 3, that note is my 5, and then the top note is my 1. So it's 3, 5, 1. And then the order changes as you go up the neck. It's changing the order of the notes. It's still the same notes, and it doesn't matter so much because you're playing them in unison anyway. But it does give you a different sound. And so anyway, my point in saying that is, when we get into a suspended chord, you're going to keep the 1 and the 5. So in this case, when we're playing out of this triad, where we're barring there on strings 1 and 2, that's our 5 and our 1. So that means my middle finger is playing the 3. Now if I go up 1 fret here, I'm playing the 4. Now what do I mean when I say 4? It's the 4th interval of my G major scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm playing the 4, the 5, and the 1 together. That's what a G sus4 chord is. It's a suspended chord. You can tell it's kind of sounds like it's floating in air. It needs to land somewhere. That's why when I go to the 3, listen, it brings it down. It brings us home. So it's no longer suspended once it comes here. It's grounded. Music is real funny like that. It's almost like a fourth dimension kind of thing, where we can all feel it. We don't really understand it, but it's there. It's suspended. It's floating. Now the same is true with the sus2 chord. You would obviously, now that you understand the logic of where the 4 comes from, you could figure out where the 2 comes from. G major scale, 1, 2. So there's my 2. And so to play that, I'm going to play the 5 and the 1 again, right? But then I'm going to play the 2nd fret 3rd string. That's a G sus2 chord. And so now we've got our sus2, which resolves. It's the same thing. It's floating. It needs to land somewhere. Now listen. You can tell suspended, needs to land. Okay, resolve. Same thing with the sus4 chord, which by the way is up here. When you bar the strings 1 and 2 on the 3rd fret, it's the 5th fret 3rd string. Suspended, and it lands. So when you're playing the 2, it's below where the 3 would be. When you're playing the 4, it's above where the 3 would be. But they're both trying to land on that 3. That's what a suspended chord is, and that's the technique that's used through this entire solo. All right, so here's where this gets really cool. So we just played the G sus4, the G sus2, and the G chord all in this little position here, this neighborhood. We're going to move it up and play out of this D triad. Think of your D chord you learn in first position. If you were to play that same triad but play it up here, you're playing a G chord. And you've still got your 1, 3, and your 5. Now the order of the notes has changed from where it was down here. So when you play this, that 3rd string is now your 5th interval. The 2nd string is your 1st interval, that's your G note, and then that's your 3rd interval. So that's my 3rd interval. So that should tell me if I wanted to play, and that's a G chord, right? So if I wanted to play a G sus4, what would I need to do? I would need to go, right? So I just need to take my 3rd interval and go up 1 fret. That's how you get to the I should have mentioned this. So that's, you take your 3rd and you go up 1 fret to get to the 4, and then you go down 2 frets to get to the 2. Hopefully that makes sense. It's still the same notes from the major scale, but that's my G chord, G sus4, and then to get to the G sus2, we do it like this. So notice these 2 fingers, the 1 and the 5, are staying the same. So I did have to rearrange my fingering there to make that work, but that's how I do it. Middle finger on the 7th fret 3rd string, ring finger on the 8th fret 2nd string. And then my index finger is down here on the 5th fret 1st string to play that G sus2 chord. So there's my sus2, which resolves to my G chord. Here's my G sus4. So just keep that shape, add my pinky there on the 8th fret 1st string, and then resolve it to the G. So now you've got your G, sus4 and sus2 chord in this position, in this position. Let's learn it in one more, and then we'll get into the song. So we're going to come up here to the A position now. So think your A chord shape from the Cage system. Top 3 strings of it is this triad. So now your notes have rearranged again from where they just were. On the 3rd string, we have our 1. On the 2nd string, we have our 3. And then on the 1st string, we have our 5. So 1, 3, and 5. They're in the correct order, actually, on this voicing. So this is another way to play a G chord. And now we know where our 3 is, right? It's this middle one. So to play a sus4 chord, we go like this. And then to play a sus2 chord, you play it like this. What I do for that is I just borrow strings 1 and 2 here on the 10th fret. And then I put my ring finger on that 12th fret, 3rd string. So I can go like this. So there's my G sus4, G sus2, and my G chord in this position. We learned it in this position, and we learned it down here. And we're using just the top 3 strings for all of this. It makes it very easy. You know, it's like just less variables to confuse us. All right, so now that we have all of that information, I'm sure you've forgotten the jam track that we started with this video. So let me play the first little part of that, and then I'll explain what I'm doing. So we're starting that down here in this neighborhood out of this E-shaped triad. And I started with this. You know what that is now. It's my sus4. And now go to my G chord. Now notice that works. Even though the chords are changing, there's a minor chord in there and all of that. It still works because these are all notes from the major scale. And since the chords in this song are all in the G chord family, these sus chords are going to work. So this is just sort of a different approach to playing lead. And when you want something that just rings for a while, I find that these sus chords are the perfect solution for that. So, and then the song goes to the D chord, and what I played was, now that's my G sus. Now this is an interesting chord because that is my G sus2 chord, but it's also my D sus4 chord. They're the same thing. That'll kind of blow your mind a little bit. And so that's why that's kind of the perfect sound that works over both of those. Now, I didn't think of it that way. I was just thinking about the G sus4 and sus2. I just happened to notice that as I'm explaining this. But anyway, that's what's going on there. So you have... And then... Now, I lifted my pinky there. So I'm basically making a D chord shape here to make that last bit, with my pinky added to the 3rd fret 1st string. That's just an easier way to do it than this. I find this is because that's the good old familiar D shape. Now, when I lifted my pinky here on this 3rd fret 1st string, I revealed this note, which is the 2nd fret 1st string. That's an F sharp note. Now, an F sharp note is not in our G chord. It's not in the G sus4 or the G sus2 as well. So that's the one exception to the sus thing where I'm actually kind of getting out of that and just that one note there. And I do it in one other spot, which I'll explain in a minute. But it does work because it's a note in the G major scale. It's our 7th interval in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can let any of those notes from the major scale just sort of ring out. And so that's why it's working. It doesn't, none of this stuff is super literal. Like you can only use sus chords if you're using this technique. But for the most part, I'm trying to stick to that just to kind of prove this point. So let's back it up and listen to what we just learned. So this next part goes. I love how you can let these notes ring out on top of each other. That's another thing I love about the suspended chords. They're just so chiming and ringing. Now you know what this is. We've already covered this. This is just your G sus2. So that's my D shape. I've got my pinky up here on the 8th fret 1st string. Revealing the G down to the 2nd string, and then let that ring while I hit that 5th fret 1st string. I love the sound of that. Notice my ring finger stays locked down the whole time. All right, so the next phrase is super easy. We just keep what we're holding here, and I just played it again. I went 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Just let it ring out. That's another thing you might experiment with as you're playing along with this jam track. Just take any of the notes from this, the sus4 or the sus2, and just play them. Let them ring. Hear how they interact with those chords. Get those sounds in your head. You can start to create some really cool Spacey sounding stuff just using this technique. sus4, sus2 chords from the G chord, which is the key of the song. All right, so for this last part, I came up to this A position. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to start with a G sus4. So I'm barring strings 1 and 2 on the 10th fret, and then I've got my ring finger on the 12th fret, 3rd string, and I played. So it's 3, 2, 1, and then watch this. There's another exception, just like we did down here. Remember, we went that note, that F sharp note. Here it is again, the same note, but I played it up here. And so what I was picturing in my head, I couldn't help myself, but I could see the D chord up here using the E shape. And I could see that I could resolve to that F sharp, which is the 3rd interval of my D chord. And that's the one exception of where I broke out of the sus chord family thing. But it is a note in the G major scale. It's your 7th interval. So I played that, and then watch this. So all that is I've got my fingers in this same position, barring here on the 10th fret, strings 1 and 2, ring finger, 12th fret, 3rd string, and I put my pinky on the 13th fret, 2nd string. That's my G sus4. Move it in to my G chord, and then lift it so that I can hit this, which is my, that 10th fret, 2nd string, which is my G sus2. So you have, and you can just let that float, and then the song, the jam track repeats itself, and you can come back into, if you want to, keep it going, playing along with the jam track. I would recommend doing this at first. Just play these notes. They're easy to play, and just kind of get your head around that. And then take the same jam track and start to experiment with it. Just start to see what happens if you let some of these notes just repeat a line over and over again. That's a big thing with this style of playing, is you take a little hook like that and you just repeat it over and over again as the chords change, and listen to how your hook interacts with those chords. You'll start to hear things that you haven't heard before. It's a really exciting way to sort of spice up your playing without getting super technical. You don't have to think theory, and you don't even have to think note names. You just think about your sus chords, sus2, sus4, of the key of the song, and start working those in. All right, that wraps up this part 1 video. I'll see you in part 2, where we'll go over a different song, a different style. It's more of a country style. And then obviously as a premium member, you'd have access to that. And then tablature, MP3 jam tracks, all those extra things. Come check us out at activemelody.com if you haven't. I would encourage you to just look around. I've got about 12 years worth of in-depth lessons like this, and they're all designed to help you improvise. All right, we'll see you in part 2.